And now we bring you Killer Wives, episode 25. Hit and Run. These are the case facts against Gaina Zuzana, who had her own husband murdered. Isn't trust a bitch? Kiev, Ukraine. Famous location of the Motherland Statue Monument. The 1986 nuclear disaster. But also made famous for the murder of one Mr. Barry Pring.
Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant. You have a call back for 86 into Central? Negative K, nothing further. Just see the cabbie in the corner.
An English expatriate living in Kiev decides to take his wife out on their 1-year anniversary after meeting online. On the menu, death. In a matter of 5 hours, Mr. Barry Pring would toast his wife and then toast time at the mortician.
You're watching MNN, the men's channel.
If you are a woman trying to kill your husband for his wealth, there are many options open to you. Some wives poison their husbands, some shoot them at point blank range, while others prefer to hire other men to do their dirty work. Just like in this case, in which a wife and her husband had just finished celebrating an anniversary. Their 1-year anniversary at a trendy Kiev restaurant and bar. Now, although this was their first anniversary, there was some that believed he wanted a divorce. He needed a divorce from his wife. He found out she was not loving or caring. Now, this may have prompted her plans to get rid of him. Not to have some of his wealth, but to have all of his wealth. Now, unbeknownst to Barry, this restaurant celebration would be his last. Our investigation revealed that while they were dining at that particular restaurant in Kiev, a car was being stolen down the road. And to that car, false plates were being added. Now, his wife's cohort was on the other end of the mission doing this. This is part of her devious plan. It is believed that in between eating and consuming bar drinks, Barry went off to the bathroom of that restaurant. Now, waiting for him in the bar, his wife would order an alcoholic drink for both of them. While he was gone, she would add a potentially lethal narcotic to his drink, which would make her husband appear more inebriated than usual. Now, his brother said he knew Barry and that he didn't drink to excess like this. Now, when it came time to leave the bar, Barry appeared so drunk that the waitress wanted to call a taxi for the couple, which would take about 40 minutes to arrive. But this wife did not want to go along with that plan. It would be against her own plans. Taking a cab would ruin the plans for her husband's death. She thought it best that they should go up to a roadway directly in front of the restaurant at the top of an embankment and hitchhike their way back into the city on a highway. What a plan. I mean, many people had done this same thing before from that particular spot, and his wife knew it, which is why she planned to off her husband this particular way. She had cased out the restaurant in advance. The restaurant was her idea, the roadway was her idea, his death was her idea. The couple stumbled through the snow, across the grass, and up the hill to the front where the highway was. She had her husband cross the guardrail separating the highway from the grass. She let him do it first to the edge of the highway before she did, but she paused. Then all of a sudden, she said that she needed to return to the restaurant to retrieve her gloves that she believed she had left at the table. Why? Now, no sooner did she conveniently turn around to leave Barry on that roadway did a speeding Volkswagen Jetta, running with its lights out, careened purposely off the highway and illegally onto the hard shoulder of that highway where Barry was standing. Now, this was to be no accident. The driver almost seemed to double his speed to twice the posted speed limit in an attempt to run over Barry. Caught unaware in his poisoned state, Barry would have but little time, if any, to spin in horror as a 4,000-pound vehicle hit him head on at over 80 miles per hour. Barry's rigid, locked-up body took the full kinetic energy of that vehicle to the side of his body and his face. But the driver never slowed, even after hitting Barry. Instead, he continued to drag and grind Barry's body against the nearest guardrail for over 150 feet until he was unrecognizably crushed. This also dismembered Barry's body. His wife, Gana Zuzina, spun around as she heard the thud and his body against the hood of that Volkswagen. She then let out a bellowing scream, reminiscent only of any movie actress trying to get those around her to believe she genuinely cared. Now, screams turned to silence as those who began to gather knew that there was nothing they could do on this snow-covered Ukrainian highway. There was nothing they could do for Barry. He was not only dead, he was dismembered. So Mr. Barry Pring, multimillionaire, his wife on the other side of the protective guardrail was ferried back into the bar that they had just left a few minutes ago by the same waitress that insisted that they wait for a cab. There, the now widow would be able to call the police to make a report of her husband's death. But how do you make a report of something that you planned? The dark vehicle that hit Mr. Pring, driving at twice the speed limit, running with its lights out, at night, didn't even raise any suspicions of anything other than a hit and run with the local police. I believe that they were completely inept at investigating this murder. Now, this was good for Mr. Pring's widow. She needed this in order that she would avoid any investigation into herself or the people connected to this horrible event that she hired to kill her husband. It needed to look like an accident. Now, police interviewed some of the horrified onlookers at the scene for any clues as to the driver or passenger. Now, one couple in particular were able to catch the license plate number of the vehicle, but subsequent investigations revealed that the plates were stolen and the vehicle could not be located whatsoever, and it has not to this day. Now, the inquest in Bristol was told Mr. Pring and Miss Moore, which is her name now, had between them drunk almost 2 pints of vodka at the restaurant before leaving just before midnight to get a taxi home. So you would ask, who would drive with their lights out at midnight on a highway in the snow? But Mr. Pring's brother believes that Ghana poisoned her husband that night in the bar just prior to leading him out to certain death she had planned with an accomplice for cash. Now, one of the musicians at the bar that night, who was performing that evening in the restaurant, told the inquest into his so-called accident she was working on the terrace that night and had a good view of the street outside. She had this to say about the tragic event of Barry's murder. She said, "I heard a screeching noise and the sound of an impact. Then I saw a dark colored vehicle move along the traffic section, and then I saw the guardrail there was a dismembered body." She told the hearing that day by way of an interpreter from Ukraine. Now, when asked to further describe what she saw, she said this.
You're watching MNN, the men's channel.
They, meaning the couple, were trying to climb over the guardrail towards the traffic. Now, this was just to wait for a car because the taxi was going to be late. She said the man had already climbed over the rail. I saw them climb. Now, restaurant worker Natalia Mitsky told the inquest, a different woman, I heard a very loud bang and I heard a scream. She says, I looked round outside and I saw a girl kneeling by the rail, which was his wife, and a bloody man on the ground, which would have been Barry. She was screaming. I saw a bloody mess in the snow and I realized that there was nothing I could do about it, and I took the young lady into the restaurant, she said. I took the young lady into the bathroom where she could wash her face, and I helped her get a drink. She said I instructed a barman to phone the police. Mr. Pring, who was originally the Devon, England, owned 3 properties in the London area and a flat in Kiev. He also owned a second flat jointly with Ms. Moore in Kiev. Now, Barry's family became suspicious that his death may have been foul play because Miss Moore, remember his wife has gotten her name changed now, was very cold towards him and not loving or caring. Now, this was heard at the inquest. Barry's family hired a private investigator in the Ukraine who discovered the authorities had not investigated Mr. Pring's death properly. You remember I said before, I believe that the police in the case were totally inept. When they looked at the crime as a hit and run, they missed out. Clearly, the accident or murder for hire led to his death. But the main factor was his choice in wife. You see, the one consistency that I have noticed in all of the 25 episodes of Killer Wives is that these wealthy men who have been killed are usually more decent than the wives that they marry. But a great many of these men, no matter how successful or how rich, seem to have the same flaw. And that is that they are typically attracted to women that are usually vain, make nothing more than trophy wives, or women that mean marriage as an institution no good. Oh, did I forget to mention that they were gold diggers? Which is exactly what Pring's wife was labeled as by his friends and his closest family. Now, in this case, the word gold digger would be Gana Zuzina. You see, Barry, the IT consultant, married Miss Zuzina, known as Anna, in 2007 in a whirlwind romance after meeting online a few months earlier. Mr. Pring's mother, Irene, told the inquest investigation in Bristol, England, that Mrs. Zuzina, now known as Juliani Moore, was a teacher. But at the same time, she was working selling tickets for shows. That she was doing this at the time that she met Barry. And in Barry, she seen a meal ticket. Now, Barry's mother said, I did not know then how they had met, but I assumed he must have met her on his travels. Barry told us Anna's parents were poor, and she was embarrassed to take Barry home to meet them. When you could be embarrassed of your parents, that's really no grounds for marriage. Now, she said Anna's English was perfect, and Barry relied on her totally when he was in the Ukraine, as he could not speak the language. Now, reading from Mr. Pring's High Court statement, which is his brother, Mr. Linden said, in truth, Miss Moore married the deceased for his money and caused his death to rid herself of him, and for her own financial benefit, where it was likely the marriage would otherwise have soon ended in divorce. So it was just not the husband that thought it was in divorce. Most everybody around him believed it was in divorce because she had no love for Barry. Now, the lawyer on opposite team said, you are saying that she did this to your brother, that she murdered him. That has been your allegation all the way through, right? He says, why was there any need for her to bring and let you know your brother had died at all? He's defending a murderer. Now, his brother replied, because I was the only one she had contact details for. The lawyer retorted and asked, if she had murdered him, the next thing to do was to cremate the body and get rid of the evidence. He said, why did she need to talk to you at all? If she was a murderer and had murdered your brother, why was there a need to let you know he had died? To this, Mr. Pring replied, I have no idea. He went on. On that night, he said, my initial concern was for Miss Moore, so he cared for his sister-in-law. He said, I had a good feeling something didn't sit right, just the way Miss Moore informed me of Barry's death. It was very calm, he said, very callous. There was no emotion. It was cold, in fact. He says, I was prepared to come to Ukraine right away because my concern was for her. But he said afterwards, I had a gut feeling things weren't right. Now, Mr. Clifford said it was possible for my brother may have been murdered for his assets and went through a list of reasons why. Now, these were the end of Barry's brother's statement. Then what the lawyer forgot to ask, in a lot of these cases, they present a great case. What he forgot to ask was, why did the original autopsy, because he went to an autopsy after the crash, why did that autopsy remove Barry's liver and kidneys, thereby preventing any subsequent autopsy from revealing that the deceased may have been poisoned? You see, the original autopsy did not look for that. But any first-year chemist will tell you that if you remove these two items from the body and you eliminate the need for cremation to hide any evidence, once they're gone, you don't have to burn the body up. The evidence is gone. Now, when Barry's body was transported to the coroner's office, it set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a comedy of errors. The coroner tested Barry's body for alcohol in this case, but not for poisons. These are normal in the liver and in the kidneys. Unfortunately for those items were done away with prior to his wife shipping Barry's body back home from Kiev to England where he lived at. There's the evidence. Not only in an inept police force, but an inept coroner. Now, when Barry's body arrived back in England, the local coroner told him it was impossible for him to do an effective autopsy, missing the liver and kidneys. Bingo. With this information, Barry's brother grew suspicious on how his brother's body was dealt with prior to him being shipped back home. And he believed that Barry's body had been altered just to prevent the prevailing of what crime was done.
You're watching MNN, the men's channel.
Because of this, his family would have conservatorship of his estate move quickly to prevent his wife from profiting from his death. On a move to counter the family's move by playing the court action against him, because she said his family was driving a political campaign, and they did, involving the then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson of England, to have her arrested and charged with murder. So she tried to move to counteract the family from stopping her from receiving the money. Now, Anna hopes this action will help her inherit a share of her husband's $3 million fortune after a long courtroom battle with his family. So she fights harder for the money than she ever did for the marriage. Now, they say she should inherit nothing because, as they told the coroner, they believe she murdered her husband Barry Pring for money. Now, it would seem that I do move fast to work to get her share of his fortune. But Anna did not move so fast when it came to his funeral. For Anna did not attend his funeral whatsoever. She never went. And it didn't take Anna long to move on with her life either. You see, Mrs. Zuzana was able to easily get along with her new life after her husband's death. Anna, who has dubbed the Black Widow in this particular case, is seen in these photos laughing and joking in a bar with her new husband. Now, this is her new husband she had only 2 years after her husband died, and she's had 2 children with also. This photo was taken less than a mile from her $1 million Marabella Villa, which she shares with London property developer Ivan Lister. Now, in both cases, she did not take the men's names that she married. Then the pair who met following the hit-and-run murder of Miss Susanna, husband Barry Pring, in Kiev. Now, it is the first time the former stripper has been seen in public since an inquest ruled that Mr. Pring was unlawfully killed after being tricked into waiting by a roadside, then being hit and run over.
On an actual clear day, this highway location is the actual spot that Barry was hit and pinned by the car. Here now is a schematic drawing of the actual scene of the accident. There you will notice Barry's location to traffic, his wife's location going towards a restaurant, where the staff was, and the location of the car that hit him, in the direction of E40, going opposite of the direction of Kiev.
In March of that year, Mrs. Zuzina, now 38 years of age, succeeded in squashing the findings of the Exeter inquest after arguing the case had been mishandled. She complained that she was not given an opportunity to testify, that a key witness was allowed to give hearsay evidence, and that new evidence relating to her husband's accident should be considered. A judge is now set to oversee a second inquest. The inquest had heard that within days, listen to this, within days after the accident, Mrs. Zuzina flew to the UK and tried to move into his London flat and claim his assets. That was more important. She didn't attend a funeral, but the assets. Anyway, Mr. Pring's family, who spent more than $139,000 trying to find out what happened, were furious when the unlawful killing findings were squashed. Now they accused Mrs. Zuzina, who has changed her name to Juliana Moore, of snubbing January's inquest. It's no problem. She snubbed the funeral. Why not snub the inquest? She also failed to attend Mr. Pring's funeral, like I said before. Now, police have previously said they made strenuous efforts to locate Mrs. Zuzina before the inquest in a bid to make her give evidence. In February of that year, it emerged she had been awarded $30,000 in legal aid in her battle to receive a major share of the IT consultant's fortune. She wanted that money to fight for his money, because remember, she was blocked. Now, the legal aid agency was considering court action against her to force her to pay the cash back, because once she was awarded the money, they wanted their money back, but she did not give it. She has bought 2 properties on the Costa del Sol, one $1 million villa she shares with Mr. Lister, 48, with whom she had a daughter in 2013. Her parents had lived in the other. Now, she set her parents up and a new man. Now, Mr. Pring's death was initially threatened as it was treated by Ukrainian police as an accident, then upgraded to a murder inquiry after the bungled investigation was exposed by Mail in 2011. Now, the Ukrainian investigation has been dogged by allegations of incompetence and a cover-up. But soon after the Exeter inquest ruling was squashed, Miss Zuzina accused Mr. Pring's family of squandering his fortune. So she was more worried about the money the whole time. Like I said, not about the family, not about making a family with Mr. Pring. Now, they called the claim preposterous and said the money had been held in an independent trust, awaiting whatever action was going to happen in the case. But in this case, the police admitted that they believed initially that it was an accident at first. But the forensic doctor judged the case involved criminal law. So even the forensics accused that this was purposeful.
You're watching MNN, the Men's Channel.
The coroner asked if another autopsy would be performed. She, the coroner, Jana, is obviously worried. Now, although Jana was not convicted of messing up the autopsy, she was unable to inherit any kind of respect for what she did in Barry's case. Barry's wife filed a lawsuit in court after Barry's family unreservedly withdrew the murder charges against her. It is understood that when Barry died in 2007, his wealth was about 1.5 million pounds, or about $3 million in 2017. His family previously said they had fought for justice for more than a decade after long suspecting foul play. So they loved him more than she, that they were willing to fight a decade after his death. But they finally withdrew the murder allegations after a high court hearing in 2019. His brother, he said he recalls these words. Thinking about Barry, he was extremely careful in traveling extensively. He was not a big drinker, and over the dozens of times, he said, I had been out, I had never seen him not in control of himself. So Barry was a guy who would stay in control, not a guy who would get sloshing drunk and then go onto a roadway. He said, I had a gut feeling that things weren't right. I spoke to a friend and lawyer, Peter Clifford, who said it was possible that my brother had been murdered for his assets. The coroner heard that Shannon had changed the locks to his brother's London flat to protect his assets after hearing of his death, and that the family had hired a private investigator to examine the circumstances surrounding his death. Good for them. Now, Shannon had also recovered his brother's laptop and briefcase from the flat to pour over emails between the couple. You see, in some cases where the killer wives, the family becomes better investigators than the actual police. He said that the family had all met Miss Moore when she came over to the previous Christmas, and she seemed to be nice and polite. Now, he added this. He said, we were aware he was going to visit Miss Moore in February for their wedding anniversary, and I believe a birthday. But if you go away for a birthday and a wedding anniversary and you come back dead, there might be something wrong with that. He said it would be a short trip, but didn't specify how long. He said, I first heard when Miss Moore called me on February 17th, and she told me, I've got some bad news for you. You better prepare yourself. This is how you start out telling somebody that their brother is dead. You should start out by saying, you killed him. Now, my first thought, he said, was that Barry had done something stupid. She went on to explain they were waiting for a taxi when he was hit and killed. She gave him two different stories. She did say that they had gone to a restaurant, but did not say where, and said they were at a little drunk. Now, my initial concern, he said, was for Miss Moore, and I was in total shock and screamed at the top of my voice. Now, in the first call, she said, she stood right next to Barry, and I just visualized him stepping off the curve of the city, and something hit him. First story. In these cases, there's always several stories. Now, in the second conversation he had with her, she said she had forgotten her gloves and walked back to the restaurant to collect her gloves, and then she heard a loud thud and bang. Story number 2. That was actually what happened, even though she faked their gloves at the restaurant to retrieve them. Now, Shannon initially suspected his brother had been murdered for his assets, but the High Court hearing in 2019 brought by Miss Moore resulted in the family releasing a statement that she had not murdered him. Now, the court required him to say that. The inquest heard those findings were not relevant to the latest inquest, which would fully examine the circumstances around Barry's death. Now, had they been able to prove she was involved in the death, they plan to use a forfeiture rule, which exists in a lot of countries, a forfeiture rule that stops killers from getting victims' cash. Now, Pring died without leaving a will, so the family would have not have to give her the assets. For Killer Wives, this is Charles Rivers. Thank you for joining us.